Welcome back to FM Storey. Today we've got another video where we've given a club £1 billion. However, this time, rather than me deciding where the money's going, we're going to let the game choose based on the season preview at the beginning of season 1. This side predicted to finish bottom of Ligue 1 will get the £1 billion. Will they be able to make it all the way to the top of the league and challenge PSG, or will they tread water despite the massive bank balance? In the Motherwell and Carlisle versions of this experiment, the money lasted for about 25 years in each of those, with varying degrees of success. Will the money last that long, or will they blow through the £1 billion even quicker? It'll be interesting to see if they look to improve their infrastructure to set them up for the long term, or if they go gung-ho and splash the cash out on transfers and wages as soon as they can. We're going to start looking at the situation at the beginning of the first season and then come back at the end of each of the first 5 seasons, and then we'll see how things go from then on. Before we do get started, if you do enjoy the video, please let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And without further ado, let's get going. So as we can see, the game has predicted Ajaccio to finish bottom of Ligue 1 in the first season, and so they're the team that we've given the £1 billion to using the in-game editor. So as you can see, they've got £1 billion in the bank. We've not adjusted the transfer budget or anything like that. Currently, they've got just shy of 8 million in debt. Now, I would expect to see that disappear pretty quickly with the bank balance, and then obviously we'll see what they do. In terms of the ground, pretty small grounds, not in great condition, just under 11,000 in terms of the capacity. It'll be interesting to see whether they do anything about the ground, whether they look to improve it, build a new one, expand it, or whether the money even lasts long enough for that. As we can see, they are a newly promoted team into Ligue 1 at the start of the 22-23 season. They won Ligue 2 twice in 1967 and 2002, and they won the Championnat National in 1998. So not a great history in terms of the facilities that they've got. Average training facilities, good youth facilities, average academy, average youth recruitment. Now, the question, of course, is going to be, do they put money into that early on to improve that? Because if they can improve the youth facilities and the youth recruitment, then long term, it might have a good impact. But it's whether they put the money towards that or whether they put it on transfers and wages. Speaking of wages at the moment, the highest paid players on £18,250 a week. Only 3 players above £10,000 per week. One of those is a player that's on loan as well. I would very, very much be surprised to see if once we come back at the end of season 1 that there's not a lot more players on more than £10,000 a week. But it's obviously going to be a tough task for them. Whether it's given the transfer budget they've got, I don't know that we'll see an awful lot of transfers before the season starts. It depends what position they're in come January and whether they splash the cash to try and stay up and see what happens from there. And we'll be back in a second at the end of season 1 to see what happens. We're at the end of season 1, and you can see there's been a few changes at Ajaccio, and things have gone relatively well for them. First of all, we can see they finished 13th in League 1. Relatively comfortable by the looks of it, 5 points clear of relegation. You can also see, just in looking at the key staff here, there's been certainly some changes have happened. They've got a new manager in Vladimir Petkovic. Eric Choupo-Moting's obviously been in on loan from Bayern Munich. Josh Sargent's been signed as now the key player. So obviously they've splashed a bit of cash. It'll be interesting to see when they did that. So looking at the transfers, very much most of it was in January. And they spent a hell of a lot of money in January. 31 million on Josh Sargent. They signed Aubameyang for 7.25 million. Sierra Alta for 7.5 million. Ilias Chair for 7.5 million. So they definitely splashed the cash in January. I wonder if they were in danger of going down at that stage. So they did start the season horrendously. It took until the 8th of October for them to pick up their first win, which was actually away at Marseille. So yeah, up until January, they were in a bit of a pickle. form picked up after those signings, but they still lost quite a number of games, and they were in a real bad run of form up until the last couple of weeks of the season, when they managed to beat Lens away and then beat Marseille away on the last day of the season. I mean, yeah, definitely January they were in. So after the first game on the 1st of January, they were second bottom. And then sort of from February onwards, they popped up. They did drop back down towards the relegation zone. But those last couple of the draw against Rennes, the victory against Lens, and the victory against Marseille sort of saved them. So despite it looking like they were fairly secure in staying up, obviously they did need to pick up at the end of the season to guarantee it. Now, we said before the first season started that there were only 3 players on more than 10 grand a week, and now that has kind of exploded. Looking at the players that they've got on big money there, I'm half surprised that Aubameyang's only on 50,000 a week. But obviously Sargent spent 31 million on £85,000 a week. I mean, he did come good with 11 goals in 21 games, which presumably was pretty key in them surviving. Aubameyang only started 1 game after they signed him. Ilias Chair only started 1 game after they signed him as well. In terms of the players that they brought in, probably Sierra Alta, in terms of looking at the average rating, was the best of them. So they've spent just under 75 million in that opening season. So that included the transfers, all those wages, and getting rid of the debt as well. So they've done pretty well in terms of only spending that much. Have they improved any of the facilities yet? I think they might have slightly increased the junior coaching. But that's about it. They've obviously improved the condition of the stadium from where it was at the start. Be interesting to see, given all those signings, where their wage budget stacks up against the other teams in the division. Obviously, PSG way out in front on 243 million, but Ajaccio now spending 30.72 million, 6th highest wage budget in the league. I mean, most of that obviously has come from those January signings, so you would have to say, given the amount they're spending and the amount they spent on transfers, you'd expect them to be much better going in season 2 than they were in season 1. And we'll be back in a second to find out how they did in season 2. So at the end of season 2, we can see they have pushed on a bit. So 13th at the end of season 1, 9th at the end of season 2. They've obviously signed Choupo-Moting on a permanent deal. They've signed Pascal Struijk from Leeds. Petkovic is still the manager. So in terms of the league table, they were actually only 4 points and a slightly better goal difference off finishing in the European places. So I'd say that was a successful season. They did improve. As we can see, they've brought in quite a few players. They've got a lot of players in on free transfers, including Matt Doherty, Gazaniga. They signed Alex Telles for 3.6 million. 35 million on Pascal Struijk seems a bit excessive. They've spent quite a bit. I would expect the wages have gone up again. Yeah, so we've got Pascal Struijk came in, he's on £115,000 a week. Jordan Ferry came in, he's on £105,000 a week. Matt Doherty's on £97,000 a week. Choupo-Moting's on £95,000 a week. Sargent's gone up as well. Like, you've got to say, Ferry, Doherty, Choupo-Moting, not exactly ones for the future. And with the exception of Ferry, they've not really actually achieved an awful lot this season in terms of their performances. But they've definitely made some additions. Obviously, it's improved the side as they've finished 9th in the league there. In the French Cup, they didn't exactly do brilliantly. They got knocked out by Nice in the 10th round. But like league performance-wise, there's a lot. Obviously, the first thing to note is there's a lot less defeats there, a lot more draws, and that April run is probably that run from the beginning of April to the end of the season is probably what cost them a chance of a European place, because they were only 4 points and a bit of a goal difference away, and like losing 2-0 to Monaco, 1-0 to Bordeaux, 3-0 to Lille. They didn't score many goals and they conceded quite a few in that period, which obviously had an impact on the goal difference, but things are looking sort of rosy as far as that side of things is concerned. So facility-wise, they've improved the training facility, they've improved the youth facilities as well. So obviously they've spent a bit of money on that. So it'd be interesting to see what's left in the bank balance. Wow. So, the end of the last season, they had 925 million in the bank. They now have 450 million. They've spent more than half of what was in the bank. I'm beginning to think this isn't going to last the 25 years that the Motherwell and Carlisle ones did, given that we're 2 seasons in and they've already spent over half of the £1 billion. Let's come back for the end of season 3 and see if they've still got any money in the bank. Okay, so the end of season 3, yet another improvement. They finished 9th at the end of season 2. They're now 8th at the end of season 3. No obvious changes in terms of key players having come in or new managers or anything like that. Josh Sargent still leading goal scorer for them. So let's have a look and see what they did transfer-wise. So they still spent 52 million. In fact, they signed anyone before that. Yeah, they signed Maxim Mukin for 10 million. So really they spent 62 million, so about the same as they did last season. This time, no real massive fees. They spent 10.5 million on Minamino, 12.7 million on Hedl, 12 million on Denisov. But no, in both of the first 2 seasons, they signed someone for over 30 million. So they did not get off to the best of starts. I mean, 1 win before November, or 2 wins, before November in the league. They did pick up in January and February, and then had another dip in March, and then ended the season well, going unbeaten from the end of March to the end of the season. They made it to the quarter-final of the Coupe de France before being beaten by Monaco. As far as the league's concerned, they missed out now by a point and a bit of goal difference on European places, so they are gradually clawing themselves closer and closer to European football. Will they be able to make it there before the money runs out? That's anyone's guess. In terms of wages, they seem to have. They've now only got 1 player on more than £100,000 a week. Obviously, Jordan Ferry signed a new deal that's dropped his salary, and they do have some players on the way out. Struick is under a transfer offer from Monaco. Matt Doherty's going to Malaga at the end of his contract. Choupo-Moting's retiring. So they are moving on some of the high earners as well. So that'll free up some space wage-wise. Now, what's left in the bank? So 261 million in the bank. So they've spent nearly another 200 million this season in all. And that's with some sizable sponsors that have obviously come on since the save started. At the end of season 4, Ajaccio finished 6th in Ligue 1, so they're going to be playing in European football next season. They are struggling a bit in terms of goal scoring, or they have this season. Only 36 goals in 34 league games, 6th worst in Ligue 1, but they have the 5th best defence. So they've jumped over the 7th spot that they've been so close to for the last couple of seasons. Finished in 6th, so they're going to be playing in the Europa League next season. Transfer-wise, they spent an awful lot less this season than they have the last couple of seasons. Now, whether this is a case of them having the players that they want now, or whether it's a case of they're starting to burn through that money pretty quickly, and they're trying to manage that a bit. But only 1 transfer above the 5.5 million that they spent at the start of the summer was the 9.75 million for Jackson Muleka from Besiktas at the end of the January transfer window. In terms of wages, definitely a lot more under control. There's now only Josh Sargent above 100,000 and no one really close to him at all in terms of the wages. Obviously, they got rid of an awful lot of high earners last season in terms of transfers out and players retiring as well. In terms of how they stack up with the rest of the league, they're currently now up to third in the league. They're spending 73 million on wages, so you would expect them to be challenging for those European places and even challenging for potentially Champions League places. But obviously, that all pales into significance compared to the 281 million that PSG are spending on wages every year. So Ajaccio also made it to the quarterfinal of the Coupe de France again. This time they got beat on penalties by Montpellier. And the season's slightly different to last season. They started the season pretty well. And they didn't have too many bad spells. It was only a couple of games at a time. They didn't go on a massive losing run at any stage, but equally they didn't go on a massive winning run really either. In terms of what's left in the bank balance, we're now down to 149 million of that billion that were there. So in 4 years, in 4 seasons, they've spent over 850 million. And it's about 120 million since the end of last season that they've spent. No money's gone into the facilities by the looks of it or into the ground. So everything's still the same there. But next season they've got European football. Can that bring in some cash and increase the bank balance, or are they going to go gung-ho for transfer-wise and end up spending it all? We'll find out at the end of Season 5. At the end of the 5th season, we've seen a bit of a drop back in terms of the league from Ajaccio having finished 6th last season. They've now finished 12th. No real major change in terms of the key personnel or the staff at the club there. But let's just jump straight in to see how they got on in the Europa League first of all. So in terms of the Europa League, they made it through the league phase of it, and also then made it past Sparta Prague in the knockout round, and then got knocked out in the round of 16 by 3-2 on aggregate by Napoli. They won the home leg and then unfortunately lost in the away leg. In terms of the league phase, it was all fairly straightforward. Obviously, they lost in Kiev and they lost at home to Braga. They did manage to beat Leicester away, and they drew at home with Fiorentina. So, relatively successful first European campaign for Ajaccio, but then going to need to improve again to get back into Europe with the drop-off that they had in the league. And basically, I mean, they had, whereas last season they didn't really have any bad spells. I mean, that spell in September where they lost every game wasn't great, and then they only won 3 of the last 7. In terms of the league table, they were only 5 points off Europe, and they were comfortably safe of being relegated, but definitely a backward step as far as the league's concerned. Which, when you consider that although the wages have come down slightly from last season, they are still third highest team spending on wages. Also, they didn't spend very much money in transfers. That's gone down again. 7.5 million that they spent. They actually made a profit on transfers. During this season, 16 million net profit there. But let's have a look and see what's happened to the old bank balance. Okay. So somehow they've made a profit of 413 million, give or take a million. They must have. Okay. Now that might well explain it. 258 million from a sponsor. Don't quite get that. Especially when, like, obviously you would expect the sponsors to be linked to the reputation. Yeah, that's a bit of a surprise. Well, I was beginning to think that the save was about to peter out, but having had that injection of cash, they're now back to over 500 million in the bank. maybe if they do things a bit more sensibly, they may end up challenging at the top end in another 5 years or so. But what we'll do is we'll come back in 5 seasons' time at the end of season 10 and see what's happened and see whether they've burned through that 562 billion or whether they've still got some of it left. We're at the end of season 10, and there's obviously been a bit of a change about obviously a lot of the players that were there at the end of season 5 have disappeared. Just even looking from sort of the player stats, you can see they've signed Maxence Lacroix, signed Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, signed Gabriel Vidovic. We've got a new manager obviously there. In fact, we've had quite a few managers since Petkovic went. Vincent Kompany came and went. Andoni Iraola came and went, and Gaisuke Garitano's been there for just over a year. So competition-wise, the last season that we saw, the end of season 5, they'd finished 12th. They then finished 9th, 7th, 8th, 10th, and 10th. So they've not really pushed on. And in fact, one of those seasons they managed to finish 10th with only 39 points. And they finished 9th with 38 points in one of the seasons as well. So obviously, there's been a few seasons where there's been some low points outside of the top bit of the table. In terms of the Coupe de France, they have actually, in season 6, they made it to the final, where they lost the final on penalties to Monaco. After that, the first they got was the quarterfinal the following year, where they lost to Lyon. Having finished 7th in the league in one of the seasons, they did make it into the Europa Conference League, where they were bundled out in the qualifying round by West Ham. Obviously, when we left it, they'd had their lowest transfer spend, but obviously they made an awful lot of money from that sponsor that came in. To the following season, they spent 60 million. They managed to get Lacroix on a free transfer, but they did spend big money on Noah Katterbach and Amad Diallo, as well as signing obviously Vidovic and Højbjerg for reasonable sums. The following season, they spent 21.5 million. They did get some good players in on free transfers, obviously towards the end of their careers, by the looks of it. Edouard Mendy and Julian Brandt on free transfers. Matoma from Brighton as well. The following season, they didn't spend a penny, but did manage to get Marcus Asensio on a free transfer from PSG, who wasn't there very long and only played one game in the season that he was at Ajaccio before he went to Salernitana. Then again, the following season, they didn't spend any money, just free transfers. And then in the most recent season, they only spent 100,000. Now, what I'm suspecting is that despite that massive increase in cash in the bank balance at the end of season 5, I suspect they might have run out of money judging by that transfer spend. And there is 13 million in the bank. However, there are now 102 million pounds worth of loans that they've taken out. So, yeah, they've managed to burn through over £1 billion in 10 seasons and don't have an awful lot to show for it. A quarterfinal in the Europa League, qualifying round defeat in the Conference League. They might have made it to the final of the Coupe de France, but generally, they've somehow blown through this cash. I mean, we are now back to having lots of players over £100,000 a week. They are moving on some of those, presumably at the end of the contracts. They actually have a pretty small first team squad as well, considering all of that and everything. I have to say I'm surprised that the £1 billion has gone so quickly. And there we have it. Turns out that the £1 billion in Ligue 1 didn't last anywhere near as long as we were expecting. Obviously, as we said, in the Motherwell and Carlisle experiments, the £1 billion lasted 25 years. In this one, it's barely lasted 10 seasons. I mean, Ajaccio are now, you would say, an established Ligue 1 side. They've had 2 European campaigns, one of which didn't exactly get very far with a qualifying round defeat, but one of them, the Europa League season, they managed to make it to the quarterfinals before they got beat by Napoli. But they have somehow ploughed through that £1 billion so quickly. And I dread to think how quickly they would have gone through it had they not had that injection of 400 million somehow at the end of season 5. I still don't know where half of that came from, because half of it was the sponsor, but there was still another 200 million that came from somewhere. I think had they not done that, they probably would have gone through the £1 billion probably within the next season or two. In the end, they managed to spend another 500 million at least in the next 5 seasons, and then ended up with £102 million of bank loans. So, an interesting result there. We are going to try this with some of the other big leagues in Europe. We're going to try it with Serie A, La Liga, the Bundesliga, and potentially even with the Premier League as well, just to see whether there's a difference anywhere else. If you've enjoyed the video, please let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.